Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is respond. Let's take a look at some of the definitions for this verb. One way we can use the verb respond is to mean to say or write something in reply. I think this is probably the most common way to use this verb. If you think about it, you respond to people's phone calls and their text messages. Perhaps you respond to emails. It's really part of our everyday life. A second way to use the verb respond is to mean to act or behave in reaction to someone or something. So, in this instance, what we're suggesting with this definition is that once we hear someone say something, we don't have to say anything back. Our actions and our behavior can communicate something, right? So this might be our facial expressions, what we're doing with our eyes. Do we roll them kind of sarcastically? What do we do with our body? Do we walk away from the person? All of those actions can be in response to what someone else has done, or it can be responding to some other event. A third way to use the verb respond is to mean to react quickly or positively to a treatment. So this particular meaning is used in the medical field. So doctors and nurses might discuss whether a patient is responding to a particular type of medicine or a certain procedure. Respond is a regular verb. To make the progressive tense, all we need to do is add ing to form responding. To make the past tense and participle forms, we're going to add ed. Since the verb respond ends with a d or d sound, the ed is going to make an id sound. Responded, responded. You might be a bit relieved to know that I don't have any additional meanings for us to look at or study today. I will note that we do use respond to, respond with. So there are participles that are used with our verb, but the meanings are exactly what we've already discussed. I don't have any additional meanings or definitions for you to know. So that's going to allow us to practice using respond to express past necessity, present necessity, and future necessity. And you might be looking at that word necessity and wondering a little bit. We're talking about needs, things we need to do. Okay? So first, let's look at past necessity. And as we work through past, present, and future, you're going to see that one way for us to express necessity is with have, to, and a base verb. So in the past tense, we're going to change have to had, and that's all we need to do to express an action that needed to be done in the past. So let's look at an example sentence. Restaurants had to respond to sudden restrictions on indoor dining. If I want to make a negative sentence to express past necessity, what I'm going to use is did not have to, and then the base verb. So here's an example sentence. He didn't have to respond in that way. So perhaps someone behaved very badly, maybe spoke really harsh words, and that might be someone's reaction. If I want to ask a yes or no question about past necessity, I'm going to do that by using did, then the subject, then have to, and my base verb. Did the police have to respond to the accident? Next, let's look at present necessity. Again, we're going to continue to use have to and the base verb. In the present tense, what's a little bit different is if our subject is singular, we'll use has to and then the base verb. So let's look at an example sentence. Students have to respond to their teacher's questions. Okay? There is a second way we can talk about present necessity. It's with the modal must. So here, must is not going to change. No matter what our subject is, it will always be must and then the base verb. So the next example sentence I'm going to give you has the exact same meaning as the one I just shared moments ago. Students must respond to their teacher's questions. Okay. Let's look now at present necessity, but negative this time. So instead of have to respond or has to respond, we're going to change to don't have to respond or doesn't have to respond. So here's an example sentence. Employees don't have to respond to emails after 5 o'clock. So what the sentence is suggesting is it is not required. It is not needed for employees to do this activity. Okay? Now, I want to point out, you will hear people say must not, but it has a slightly different meaning. So the two sentences I gave you before here in the affirmative, they have the same meaning, but the two sentences I have here in the negative do not have the same meaning. Okay? So let's look at that, and then I'll explain the difference. So the sentence, employees must not respond to emails after 5 o'clock. This implies there are going to be consequences. There's going to be a problem if someone responds to another message at 6 o'clock, at 7 o'clock, etc. Okay? So in the first, it's more like a suggestion. You don't need to do this. But in the second sentence, in my example there, you better not do it. Okay? If you want to ask a yes or no question about present necessity, you can do it two ways. Okay? We can start with do or does, then our subject, then have to, and the base verb. So an example of that, do I have to respond? Is it necessary? Or I could say, must I respond? Same thing, same meaning. So affirmative and the questions have the same meaning, but the negative does not. Finally, let's look at future necessity. Again, we can continue to use have to and our base verb, but since it's the future, we're going to use will at the beginning. So here's an example sentence. We will have to respond to the census by the end of September. So again, in case you're not in the United States, we are doing a population count here in the US right now, and people are being asked to respond by the end of the present month. I can also use must to express future necessity. And so the structure here is going to look exactly the same as present necessity. The clue or the indication that this is future will usually be a time signal. So in this case, by the end of September. We must respond to the census by the end of September. So that's what's indicating future. If I want to make a negative sentence that for future necessity, I'm just going to use the have to form. Okay, so I'll insert not after will. You might hear native speakers use won't. I won't have to respond to the text. Okay? If I want to ask a yes or no question about a future activity and whether it's needed or necessary, I can do that two ways. I can start with will, then I'll have my subject, then have to, and the base verb. That's my first example. Will she have to respond to the letter? But I can also ask a question in the future using must. So the structure there, must, then my subject, then the base verb. Must she respond to the letter? Again, those two questions have exactly the same meaning. Now, let's take a look at some words that are connected to our verb respond. The first is a noun form. It's response. And just like our verb, it can also have a couple different meanings. The first way we can use the noun response is to mean a verbal or written answer. Here's an example of that. Did you get a response to your question? A response could also be a reaction to something. So this connects really well to the first two definitions we looked at earlier for our verb. Here's an example of that meaning in a sentence. What was their response to the good news? Okay. So here, again, we're not limited to just words, either verbal or written. We can describe physically what someone did. Okay. Did they yell? Did they run around? Or maybe they cried. Some people cry when they're really happy as well. Another related noun is the word responder. The definition here is a person trained to respond to and deal with emergencies. Let's take a look at this noun in a sentence. Many first responders in New York City gave their lives trying to help others on September 11, 2001. You might, if you're here in the United States, and we just celebrated the anniversary of the terror attacks in New York, D.C., and Pennsylvania. But this noun form usually comes up in talking about first responders. So who are the people who are trained to respond to and deal with emergencies? Those are firefighters, police, EMTs. Those are, I would say, kind of the three big groups for responding. You will hear responder used with other natural disasters. So there's a hurricane in the southern part of the United States. It looks like it's going to come onto land fairly shortly. And maybe it will be on land by the time you watch this video. There are going to be another trained group of people who rush to that location as soon as the storm weakens or lessens a little bit to deal with the effects of the storm. The last word we'll look at is an adjective. It's responsive. One meaning for this is just answering. Okay? So this will can connect back a little bit to the third definition of the verb, the medical connection. Okay? The patient is responsive. So that would mean the patient is able to talk or communicate in some way. They are able to respond to a doctor or nurse's questions. Another way to use the adjective responsive is to mean reacting quickly and positively. Here's an example of that. The company is responsive to its employees' needs. So this is suggesting that if employees express something isn't going well, we don't feel safe, or we're having this issue, they are going to quickly address and try and fix that particular problem or need. Thanks so much for watching today's videos. I hope you'll use the verb respond as you speak or as you write this week. Have a great day.